Today on CityCast Philly, Mayor Sherelle Parker made it clear the city is not funding needle exchange programs. That's a big pivot from previous mayoral administrations. But several harm reduction organizations like Prevention Point say programs like theirs reduce the transmission of diseases. I'm speaking with a local health reporter about why the city is changing its drug policy and why experts fear this could create a spike in HIV rates. It's Thursday, May 2nd. I'm Trinine Uri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Courtney Harris-Bond, health reporter for Philly Voice. Thanks for coming to CityCast Philly.
Thanks for having me.
The city is cutting funding off to needle exchange programs. Courtney, this is a big change from its previous needle exchange policy. So I kind of want to go back and look at how we even got here. You report that more than 30 years ago, the city was experiencing many challenges, which resulted in having such programs to begin with. Can you kind of take us back? What was going on in Philly in the early 90s?
Philly in the early 90s was the height of the AIDS epidemic, HIV/AIDS epidemic. Nearly 33,600 Americans had died from HIV that year. And, death was just everywhere in the country and in Philadelphia. And so public health officials really felt that something needed to be done to help prevent the spread of HIV. Injection drug use, needles, are a really great way to spread HIV. So people often think of sex as a primary way to spread HIV, but using intravenous drugs and needles is a very, very effective way to spread HIV. So the idea was that people in acute addiction who were injecting drugs turn in used needles for sterile syringes.
Okay, so clean needles. That was the needle exchange program.
Yes.
So what is Prevention Point and what services do they provide?
So Prevention Point Philadelphia started off as a needle exchange program in 1992 run by people in addiction. And since then, it's grown. They now provide medical services, walk-in HIV/AIDS clinic, case management. They provide medication for opioid use disorder, as well as some housing for people experiencing homelessness and other services.
Is Prevention Point the only needle exchange program in the city?
No. Other smaller organizations do needle exchange. The nonprofit Savage Sisters collects used syringes, and they do distribute clean, sterile syringes to users. But Prevention Point is far and beyond the largest needle exchange in the city and has received the most city funding.
So, Courtney, what happened after Prevention Point started? Did it work?
Yes. A specific study that looked at syringe exchange in Baltimore and in Philadelphia, specifically at Prevention Point. And it showed that 10,500 HIV diagnoses tied to injection drug use in Philadelphia were averted due to the needle exchange, and that the city saved about $243.4 million each year based on averted HIV diagnoses. And Baltimore also saved significant money and saved a lot of lives as well.
At the same time, though, in the early 90s, there were laws around injecting drugs. What were those laws around offering clean needles so that people could inject drugs? Was it legal at the time?
So technically, no. In the 70s, the federal government had enacted a drug paraphernalia law, and then the states followed suit, criminalizing any kind of drug paraphernalia for distribution or sale, and that included syringes. But these laws were aimed at people selling drug paraphernalia for profit. And Scott Burris, a professor at Temple University's Law and Public Health Schools, argued that that didn't apply to syringe exchange because syringe exchanges were not selling needles for profit. They were distributing them for public health purposes. And Mayor Ed Rendell at the time in 1992 declared HIV/AIDS a public health emergency. And so he issued an executive order authorizing Prevention Point to open. And he based this on the legal argument that distributing sterile syringes was not violating state drug paraphernalia laws.
What's been Prevention Point's impact here in Philly?
As a reporter, I've been covering behavioral health in Philadelphia since about 2016, and I've spent a lot of time in Kensington on the ground getting to know people. And I spent a significant amount of time in Prevention Point and learning about their services and talking to people there. And what strikes me is that they treat individuals with dignity and provide such a wide range of services that people experiencing addiction and homelessness probably would not be able to access otherwise. You know, I'm not an expert on that. I'm a journalist, but it has been sort of a major driver of providing a lot of services to people in acute addiction and homelessness in the city.
After the break, why the city is now cutting off funding to these needle exchange programs. Courtney, now in 2024, why is Mayor Cherelle Parker taking such a stark pivot to stop funding needle exchange programs?
So in her first budget address to City Council, Mayor Parker said, sort of her now famous quote, that not one city dollar would go to needle exchange programs. She has said the city can't afford to appropriate funds for these services. The city has scant funds to begin with, and that she feels philanthropies, businesses, other sources should pay for needle exchange programs in the city. Her administration has said that nobody contests the efficacy of needle exchange, just that the city is not going to use any opioid settlement funds or any city dollars to pay for syringe exchange. And in the past, I think Prevention Point was getting close to $1 million a year for specifically the syringe exchange services. And the administration has said that it plans to invest about $100 million into a comprehensive system of long-term care, treatment, and housing for people struggling with addiction, mental health challenges, and homelessness. But I think there's been a lack of specificity about what those services will be.
And let's just remind our listeners about the opioid settlement money, where it came from.
So opioid manufacturers, distributors, and retailers are paying tons of billions of dollars in restitution to settle lawsuits related to their role in the overdose epidemic. The Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, was sued and had to pay a bunch of money to the federal government, which has trickled down to the states. And the states are distributing it, and Philadelphia gets a certain amount over a period of years to pay for opioid treatment services and other services related to opioid addiction.
Courtney, now that the city is not going to fund needle exchange programs, what's been the reaction from public health experts?
There's been a strong reaction. Public health experts and harm reductionists are predicting a surge in HIV, new HIV diagnoses. they've made the point that it isn't going to just be confined to the injection drug users contracting HIV, but that, injection drug users have relationships and that it will then spread to people beyond that population and so on. So it could be quite wide ranging as far as the public health experts that I've talked to have said.
Courtney, you told me that you've spent time at Prevention Point speaking with folks. Have you heard anything from the group about what it could mean for them losing this money?
Prevention Point has not been commenting specifically on this issue. I can't speak to why that is. I don't want to hazard guesses. However, I have seen messages they're sending out to the community to try to fundraise and saying that they're very concerned about the loss of this money and their needle exchange is crucial and that they're worried what the loss of this money will do to their services.
Courtney, this is a part of a bigger shift in how the city administration is approaching drug issues in Philly. We've talked on the show recently about Mayor Parker's police plan for Kensington, for example. And you just mentioned before the break, you've spent time in Kensington. How does this change around needle exchange programs fit into the overall plan for Kensington?
Mayor Parker's administration is taking a law and order approach to Kensington and dealing with the open air drug market there. People who work with people in acute addiction feel as though arresting people for low-level drug crimes is not the answer, and that offering them treatment or jail, it won't be easy to just have them sign on to treatment, and that there won't necessarily be enough places for people to go, even if they agreed. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say that's going on and that people know about probably, but fentanyl is such a huge problem right now. It's 50 times more potent than heroin, which essentially means that people who are addicted to opioids now are using fentanyl and have to inject every 3 to 4 hours just to stave off withdrawal symptoms. And so the injection rates are much higher, which public health officials then say all the more need for sterile syringes, more sterile syringes, not fewer. And also, it's not as simple as just offering someone treatment and they're agreeing to go into treatment. It's a much more complex matter than that. It's a confluence of mental health, addiction, poverty, racism, all kinds of issues at once. And so this is a very complex issue.
Courtney Harris-Bond, health reporter for Philly Voice. Thanks for speaking with me about your reporting on CityCast Philly.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can read Courtney's full story by clicking the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this episode. Rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.